Das Privyet! Welcome to Quick Step. We're going to talk about Russia and the 2016 election, which is almost 2 years old already. So I got a wonderful request on the Step Back subreddit to do this quick step about what's the real deal with Russia and intervening in the American election. There's been a drip of news over the years, and it seems like it's just a whole lot to keep in your head at one point. And as I did the research for this, I realized that's because there is a whole lot to put in their head. We have an incomplete story right now, and the investigation is still ongoing, and some things are kept secret for the sake of improving the investigation. So we get fragments, and also there's a lot of histrionics and politics involved. A lot of centrists who make a lot of money and have very big platforms have been blowing it up to be more than it is, and a lot of right-wing people who seem to think that Donald Trump is good somehow have been trying to downplay it. So it's really hard to keep track as to what's going on, really. As a damn dirty socialist, I can say that I have no stake in either of those, and so I can talk a little bit about what Russia did and maybe talk a little bit about what the election looked like, and we'll see where we go from there. So the first thing we should talk about is, what was Russia's goal exactly? A lot of centrist media out there, especially the MSNBC, are trying to make the claim that this was them buying Trump, that they were trying to turn Trump into some sort of Manchurian Candidate. Judging how under Trump's government there have been 2 new rounds of sanctions put against Russia, I hesitate to say it was very effective if that was their plan. However, according to the FBI, Russia's goal was not to own Trump, but it was to sow discord and undermine faith in the American democratic process by promoting candidates that were diametrically opposed to the Washington consensus. So yeah, that meant Donald Trump, because if Donald Trump isn't chaotic evil incarnate, I don't know what is. But they also did try to boost the candidates of Jill Stein and, I'm very sorry, my boy Bernie a little bit, although not nearly as much, because Trump was much better at sowing chaos, as they found out. According to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Russians did intervene in the election in various different ways, and there's significant evidence to say that this came from Vladimir Putin himself. So the first thing that the Russians did was hack into the private servers of the Democratic Party. They did so by using a phishing email, which is an email that is designed to look like a normal email, like say a password reset or something like that. And it was sent to John Podesta, who he got an obvious phishing email and he clicked it, and DNCs got hacked. And they sent all of the stuff they collected over to WikiLeaks, and that's where a lot of the email drops happened. Maybe if you work in government, you should have tighter security measures and maybe not use Gmail. And this is backed up by forensic evidence, and I can talk about a few of those. So a lot of the leaks were done by somebody, you might remember the name Guccifer 2.0. A lot of those IP addresses that people logged in through this from came from sources that were running through proxies, except for one in which they found it did come from a source within the Russian intelligence. And they used bitcoins, which they thought were untraceable, but really bitcoins don't so much make you untraceable as they do slow down the process in which you trace. If you are determined enough, you can find out who a bitcoin belonged to. There's a whole field of bitcoin forensics going around. Seriously, using a huge percentage of our electricity and basically providing nothing of substance, what is the point of Bitcoin? But that's a different video. I should also point out, just to be fair, that the Russians have denied this themselves, but of course they would. But I don't know, as far as the evidence looks, we've got them dead to rights at this point. And then there was, of course, the whole fake news thing. And this one, I think, has been a little less hard to determine having a huge impact. The fake news thing is basically that the Russians paid for a whole lot of disinformation, misinformation campaigns, and used powerful social media platforms and the powerful targeting that comes with the modern day data brokerage and advertising world in order to push conspiracy theories and all sorts of strange stories about the election in order to at least sow chaos. And there's a bit of a timeline. In October of 2016, actually on Halloween, Barack Obama got on the red phone with Putin and said, like, hey, cut it out. And it seems that in the fullness of time, there's been realizations that these kinds of things have been experimented with, and the Russians have been doing this in America in small ways ever since 2008. This was just their big time where they finally actually made a huge difference. And by huge, I'm actually not sure how huge it was, but we'll get into that later. In December of that year, Obama kicked out a bunch of ambassadors, closed some embassies. If you remember this, it was a pretty big deal. And then there was some sanctions already on Russia, and Obama put more on. And actually, because of this year, Trump has actually put on more sanctions on Russia, which you don't hear all that much about. And on top of Trump, even the Treasury Department has put in more sanctions, and some countries in the European Union. So I don't think they were expecting to get caught, which has resulted in Russia being very isolated. But honestly, if you're Vladimir Putin and your only goal is to have your country love you and consolidate power, actually looking like the persecuted person in the world really helps, especially since in Russia there's a large propensity for conspiracy theories to run rampant. It's actually quite common in like authoritarian regimes. Now, Trump himself also rejects that Russia had a point to say in this election. Most people who seem to know the way that Trump thinks have argued it's because he feels sad in his sad parts, because he realizes it means he didn't actually earn his new toy White House. Because, you know, the idea that Trump ever earned anything he ever did is a laughable concept, but I imagine that he has quite a complex about that. And so he claims that he won the election solely on his own merits. And he's wrong. He's very wrong. But he's not as wrong as like MSNBC would say. I would say that those who are very loyal to the Democratic Party seem to be using the Russia story in order to downplay the Democrats' own failings in the 2016 election that were huge. Hillary Clinton, the candidate of the Democrats, even won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College. We'll get to that in a second. But it was a close election, and it shouldn't have been. It was Donald Trump, after all. So let's talk a little bit about what the Democrats didn't do, and so we can remember to not do these things in the future. First, we should talk a little bit about Robbie Mook. The Clinton campaign, compared to other Democratic candidates in the past, decided to forego the typical strategy of trying to go out and canvass and get votes, and decided to use a more data-driven approach in order to maximize their campaign energy in areas that the math told them would be best uses of their time. What this resulted in is a campaign that largely went to places where they thought they could sway the vote, and ignoring places that they thought they were safe, not realizing that the data was bearing out that there were Democratic strongholds that were falling apart, specifically in that Midwestern area. But the robots told them that they shouldn't go there, and so they didn't. They made no campaign stops, and they made next to no effort in the Midwest. Even some former like Bernie Sanders canvassers and Democratic groups in the Midwest were asking the Clinton campaign for even like some support, some money, some resources in order to do their door-to-door things. Sorry, a helicopter's going by. And they were rejected. And this also speaks to another issue that the Democrats have been having, which is that they've been focused so much on winning like the White House and the federal government that they've actually started to abandon a lot of Democratic energy at the lower local levels, especially in states that they think are write-offs, which has led to a total Republican dominance of a lot of states, which is not a good strategy. You should be turning non-voters into voters, not just abandoning large swaths of the population because people are the things that you need votes from. I think the Democrats also grossly underestimated the power of the Occupy Wall Street movement, and especially the power of millennials. Bernie Sanders was a upset, something that nobody expected, because nobody realized that there were a lot of angry young people who were kind of mad at this whole neoliberalism thing and kind of wanted to have some of those things that America doesn't have that the rest of the world does, like, you know, a universal healthcare service. And hey, maybe getting rid of tuition too, mostly because young people are in tons of debt. And on top of that, medical bills are the number one reason why people go bankrupt in America. But yeah, like basically there was some holes in the Democratic platform that the Russians were able to exploit because the Democrats just decided to give up on large swaths of the things that people wanted. The Republicans leveraged a lot of their dumb culture war stuff in order to win, and the Democrats should have won on the, practical programs that would have made the world better, but instead they decided to go with, I don't know, you'd have to read their website. And there was actually a lot of incentive in the Democratic Party to not be responsive to these things because Hillary Clinton had decided that she was going to be president, and the Clintons are a powerful entity in Washington. Let's talk about them a little bit. So first of all, American politics is fundamentally broken because it's overwhelmingly corrupted by money. That's not exactly a weird statement to say in this day and age. I think everyone pretty much knows that. But in the age where politicians have to spend lots of time, multiple hours a day on the phone with donors rather than doing government things, the Clintons were in control of a lot of money. And so very often when they said jump, a lot of politicians would say, how high? The only Democrats who came out in support of Bernie Sanders, for example, and for sort of platforms that would help people, are people who took enormous personal losses in order to do so. Tulsi Gabbard had to resign from her position in the DCCC, and Keith Ellison probably lost his run partially because of it as well. Also, there's a well-known thing in Washington politics to not cross the Clintons, as they have a very powerful enemies list. They keep track of people who detract from their party line, and they often face consequences. Typically, a lot of funding for their opponents, withdrawing of funds, and very often politicians' careers can be taken down by crossing the Clintons. And they also have a lot of political advisors, one in particular, who are known for playing particularly dirty political games. The Clinton campaign is the one that started the Obama's a Muslim thing. People don't remember that very much. And of course, there's issues with the Electoral College, which was made as a compromise in order to make sure that the slave states were happy, in which the president is chosen by however many Electoral College votes they get. And the amount of votes that each state gets is based on how many representatives and senators they have, which roughly gets proportional, but gives undue preeminence to states that don't have many people in them. Some states like Alaska that only have one member of Congress but 2 senators all of a sudden get 3 electoral votes, which there's not a ton of. And so a lot of states that are very empty, especially in America today because of the long-term trends happening in America, there's a lot of states that are very white, very right-wing, but don't have a ton of people in them. And then a lot of the states that tend to be very left-wing have a lot of people in them, but only in one state. And so you end up with a heavy skewing in favor of rural white people. And I don't think you need to be an expert in political science to know that giving extra votes to rural white people will help the Republicans. And I think that the failings of the Democratic Party and the influence of Russia are both being used as ways to ignore another problem, which is that maybe America wasn't as not racist as people thought it was. If anything, 2016 was a turning over of the rock and realizing that there's a lot of bugs. And I think that a lot of people are scared to admit that there were a lot of factors going on in the 2016 election. It wasn't just Russia. It wasn't just how bad the Democrats were. And it also has to do with racism and I hate to give any credit, but also there was some breaking of the standard mold of electioneering that Trump did that I think made a lot of people think he seemed more authentic and voted in that sense. And I think that if we are going to try and counter this tactic in the future, a future Democratic person might need to be a little bit more authentic and less prepared, which I know was the way that politics ran for a long time, but Trump kind of broke the book, and there's no unbreaking it. And now it seems that there are some of the first real things starting to go down about involvement between the Russians and the Trump campaign. Paul Manafort's going to trial. He's in jail right now, which is awesome because the guy is a freaking scumbag. But Carter Page and Roger Stone are also coming under fire. And there's also been indictments of Russian intelligence agents in the United States. And this was all done by an investigation done through the FBI that basically began before the end of the 2016 election and has been going on to this day. Originally, it was done by a right-wing Obama appointee named James Comey, who got fired in May of 2017 by Trump because of his insistence on following this Russia thing, as he would say and then unsay and then say again. And he's been replaced by a new FBI chief named Robert Mueller, who is currently doing the investigation. And as you hear on the news all the time, he's always on the verge of getting fired for doing his thing, which doesn't, if that doesn't scream, I'm probably guilty, should. In fact, I think like at least 11 people in the Trump administration have admitted that they were having contact with Russia. So that's pretty bad. And that's where we are now. I hope I explained the whole Russia thing and then a little bit about the Democrats and the 2016 election all down to a good place. I think there's a lot to talk about. I think that if you wanted to do American politics, you're gonna have to change your game there, Democrats. Maybe we should, do something about that in the future. Just saying. But yeah, 2019 is when the candidates are going to start announcing their candidacies, and there's going to be debates probably in like October, November of 2019. The 2020 election is already on people's minds, and the 2018 election hasn't even happened yet. So we're starting to move in this direction, and let's just see how it goes. Honestly, it's a little bit terrifying. Yeah, already I think I'm actually starting to lose my voice. I did Thursday's video and this at the same time, so I'm starting to get going. But anyways, please, if you like this video and you want to suggest another quick step video, you can go to the Step Back subreddit /r/stepback. And if you're already following Matt and you're subscribed to Step Back and you're bell notified, then you're good. Maybe share this with a friend. Maybe if somebody seems confused with the Russia thing, you could just like push that old share button and send it over. And for the rest of you guys, have a great week. I'll see you on Thursday.